Welcome to Studio Lake House. My name is Ranjula Manchanayaka. Today we have in the house a guest, a lawyer turned parliamentarian, Miss Lakmali Hemachandra. Welcome to the show, Miss Lakmali.
Thanks for having me here, Ranjula.
No worries at all. And you are a practicing lawyer for a long time, is it?
Yes, for about 10 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And how has that transition been from being a lawyer to the political establishment? And if you can, elaborate on it.
From being a lawyer to the political establishment, there are certain things very similar, but certain areas which is not, let's say, very different. For example, when you're a lawyer, you're basically, advocating for a cause.
Yeah.
Although some people might not see it like
Yes,
that, that
yes.
is basically what we're doing. We're trying to advocate for somebody, and which is very similar to what a parliamentarian also does. You're basically representing somebody and trying to push their cause forward. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to ask you was, I'm sure as a lawyer you navigated the system very much, advocated like you said, and how is it looking at the regulation, the policy, and the complete system itself
Yeah.
from the other side of the fence?
Yeah.
I mean, okay, let's start with what were the criticisms you had when you were a lawyer,
Yeah.
and how is it looking at from the other side?
Yeah. So as I was saying, I mean, being a lawyer actually helps you to understand how complicated the system is, as opposed to somebody who's maybe just an activist. A lawyer has to come up with actual outcomes at the end of the day, right? You can't just say something, you also have to win your case. And going through that process actually makes you understand that having concrete outcomes eventually at the end of a process is not as easy as advocating for it simply from the outside.
Why?
Because it takes a lot of so we have constrained resources, right? And we have, like you said, the policy frameworks are very limited in some cases, and legislations are very limited in some cases, but we still have to navigate through that system, right? And you also have a procedural framework where you have to adapt to.
Your point, we have to navigate it in that system.
Yeah.
I mean, if I told you, like, I think we will both agree when I said, I mean, the system is quite complex, the regulation, and when you look at the policy area, it's quite fragmented, siloed, and overlapping at the same time. To put it simply, there's a lot of gray area. Right. Why is it so hard to fix that? Like, I mean, where should we start? I mean, at least, why is it so hard?
As a lawyer, we like the gray area because that's where we operate, right? But true, for people, like for regular people, I think it's important that you know what is definitely which part is, applicable to you. So I think what happens, Angela, is once you start with a policy and once you start with the practical implementation of the policy, you're not known to all the outcomes of what the policy will eventually affect, right? So there's a limited sense of what will actually happen. And once it's implemented, then you actually start to see, okay, this is a challenge that we did not predict. And this might be something that, we have to fix. That's an area that you actually confront when something becomes practical, which is not how policies are always conceived.
Isn't there a framework? Isn't there a textbook framework to implement probably in a regulatory sense to navigate that? No?
There is. I mean, of course, you have to, do your basic research. You have to make sure. This is why participatory policymaking is very important, because then you get all the information, all the aspects, all the dimensions from all the stakeholders, and it's important to understand that. But still, you can, that you cannot predict everything that will eventually happen from one regulation, from one law, one policy. So you have to, then you have to be very open to the idea that it might not be the 100% and keep it flexible to amendment and fixing later on.
If I sort of bring up a practical example, and let's say that if you want to do something in Sri Lanka, let's take land, which is one of the most complicated areas, right? And you have to go through the provincials and you have to go through each ministry, and their duties overlap and they start pointing fingers. I mean, that's the case of Sri Lanka, to be very realistic, right? What can we do to sort of stop that? And I mean, even if it's not a one-time thing, where's the start?
So with lands specifically, I think I think we've had this conversation with the Export Development Board. Because one of the key areas which we need land release to is for export development, to develop exporting industries. But for some reason, that is not an area that when land commissioners think about land,
Yeah.
this is not an area that they're focusing on or prioritizing, right? So one thing that we can do is to make sure that there are goals attached to land allocations. I think with this government, we have tried to do that. Of course, you have to sort of redo the whole system and redo the whole state administration in
Yes.
sense of how to prioritize land and all of that.
Yeah.
But I think we have brought a sense of priorities to make sure that land is not just allocated on private interest. Land is allocated on mainly public interest. And when land is allocated, it's given economic development is the main goal that we are looking at, whether it's agriculture, whether it's industries or whatever. We have to make sure that there is a social and economic outcome in the land allocation.
I really like the point that you're making, social and economic outcome.
Yeah.
The problem maybe in this whole landscape, it's not probably economically aligned,
Yes.
right? When you look
Yeah.
at it, it's
Yeah.
structurally aligned per institution.
That's
Where
true.
yes, where should that change come from, and
That's
how
true.
can we pivot towards that?
That's true. That's an area that which we think we have been able to achieve for the last 1.5 years. Then we have to move forward from there into public investments, into expanding the investment portfolio in certain areas. So we are looking at energy, we're looking at transport, and we're looking at the digital economy specifically.
Yeah.
So those are the key areas that the government is currently looking at. Even if you look at the president's budget speech, it's very clearly outlined that we're looking at energy, transport, and digital economy because we think that the future lies there, right? But that also doesn't mean that we should leave behind the whole traditional economic structure of Sri Lanka. Right now, we don't have a strong digital economy. Right now, we don't have a strong transport sector, and we don't have a strong energy sector, right?
Yeah.
But we do have tourism. We do have traditional export industries, and we do have agriculture. So we have to make sure, in order to make sure that the country is not falling apart, while we make sort of a very futuristic turn towards let's say future industries like energy, transport, and digital economy, we also have to make sure that farmers are given the proper subsidies, that export industries are taken care of, and that tourism continues to thrive in Sri Lanka. Otherwise, we will face an economic crisis in the country. So I think the government is trying to strike that balance. We are looking for investments in energy, transport, and digital economy, but we're also taking care of the what we would say the basic economic structure in Sri Lanka.
As far as energy, transport, and
Yeah.
digital economy is concerned, in the previous time period, there is a slight criticism that the government is slow to act and the capacity is not coming as required as such. Any feedback on that? And is there any structural issues in the system that's enabling that?
I think more than the structural issues, we have a legacy that we have to continue with, right? So one thing that we did was, if you look at the work that we have done for the past year, areas that we prioritized were the Electricity Act. We wanted to make sure that it was aligned to the state policy, but the restructuring continues, and we were able to do that. And then the next area that we focused on was transport. So not just highways. There are plans to invest in railways, and then modernize public transport and make sure there's electrification in transport. So these are the projects that the government is looking at. Even for the next year, those projects are planned and aligned. So with the digital economy, the basic requirement for the most basic public infrastructure required for a digital economy, as we see it, is the unique ID, right? The digital ID. And the government has accelerated that process. So we are hoping that we will have an outcome by the end of this year, that we will be able to issue the first digital ID by the end of this year. And then let's see, then afterwards, I think once you have the ID, then you can develop a lot more public infrastructures into the digital economy.
Definitely.
And I think if you look at the export industries also for the last year, one of the key areas that we have actually gained is the IT industries. So, and we are going to invest in the IT park also. So there are so many projects and policies that we are looking at.
would there be a material change and a visible sort of a developments in those areas in the remaining period of this tenure?
Yes. So I think one key area that we would like to, let's say energy, we are looking at sustainable energy, right?
Yeah.
So for the past few months, we were able to scrap a few unfavorable projects, but at the same time, we were also able to bring in new projects with better pricing and better investments also. So, and I think there is more chance, there are more opportunities in energy investment in Sri Lanka.
Another area that the government aggressively focused, at least in the first half of the first year or so, is the social protection and aspasuma and protection of vulnerable women and such. Any sort of progress? I mean, to the point, probably some people criticize that, but in that area, in the vulnerable communities, is there any progress has happened through the action?
Yeah, so we, even with the IMF, we have a target of giving 0.6% of the budget to social protection, and that's a must. So I think it's not fair to say that you should not allocate money for social protection, because social protection does not necessarily mean giving it to poor, right? It's about protecting groups of people in the community who are not able to take care of themselves at the moment. Doesn't mean that you will do it forever, but right now maybe there is a requirement. So especially again, because we are a country coming out of an economic crisis, there's a huge number of people. So for example, even right now we have 22% poverty in Sri Lanka, which is huge. Which is huge. So we have to be able to take care of those people. But then we also have a plan of empowering them economically, which is where as much as Aswasuma is helpful, Aswasuma does not have a economic empowerment scheme.
And that's the criticism.
That is the criticism. That is the criticism, because it's just cash transfers, right? So, which is why we have the Praja Shakti, which is a bit different from Aswasuma. It's not just a cash transfer. So what we are trying to do is, we are trying to make sure that at the level of each village, you have participated decision making in building their own projects, to make sure that you have maybe economic projects, maybe water projects, maybe any barrier that you see as a development barrier. You are given your allocated money to tackle that.
Are they connected to the provincial councils in any way, or no?
No, they are not connected to provincial councils, but of course you can get the help of the provincial councils. These are run through the divisional secretariat systems.
Sure. Before we move from the policy area, anything you want to add in that space or anything?
No, I think
great.
You've done a good job of covering everything.
Thank you. And I would like to understand your thoughts on the economy, actually. It has been in the conversation for the past couple of months. Your thoughts?
So I think, like I said, last year, the priority for us was economic stabilization, right? And the major area that we actually achieved that was in terms of public finance.
Yes.
I think the conversation is quite clouded these days about what is happening in the economy. But I think for the first time since 1957, for the first time since 1957, we achieved the lowest budget deficit in Sri Lanka, which was 2.3%. It's huge, because usually we would run deficits above 5%. And in 2022, when the economy collapsed, we were running a deficit close to 10%, right? So it's to be able to manage the economy, to be able to manage the finances of the government is a huge task in Sri Lanka. And I think we don't understand the implication of it in terms of what it would contribute in a future sense, right?
You were right, like focus was needed in certain areas, and the government did certain job to sort of continue what has been doing, what has been done. But it feels like government is focusing very much on the government revenue, which is also not a bad thing. But in a certain sense, it feels like it's exerting a certain sense of pressure in one part of the community, Sri Lanka. Any initiatives to change that, and like your thoughts?
Yeah, I think as the government, as the NPP government, we haven't actually introduced a lot of new taxes, right? And one of the first things that we did when we came into the government was to reduce the tax threshold of pay. It was 100,000 per month earlier, so we brought it to 150,000. And because we understand that the salaried professionals are sort of under pressure with the tax system right now, but we also have to understand that that you have to pay taxes also, right? It is also a requirement, and it doesn't matter how much you pay. So if you're because tax system also has to be fair and progressive.
Definitely.
And I think the issue with the current tax system is that there is a lot of pressure on indirect taxation, whereas direct taxation is not fully implemented.
Yeah. And also on that, every Sri Lankan citizen on average would pay about 74% on tax on everything we buy, direct plus indirect. With the direct, the tax is actually limited to a certain set of individuals. Are there any plans to sort of improve that, change that? What has to change? What are the new steps that has been taken in this space?
So direct tax would always mean that the higher income you have, more you will pay on your personal income tax, right? And even for corporate income tax. But I think our tax system has relied so much on indirect taxation. I think we have improved it. In the last few years, we have improved compliance in terms of all types of taxation. Compliance is very important when it comes to personal income tax and corporate income taxation. Even the new tax amendment, Indian Revenue Indian Revenue Act amendment that we passed, I think we passed it a few weeks before in the Parliament. A lot of people criticize it to being too harsh, but I think that kind of harshness is also required when you're trying to get more direct taxation into the system. So if you're a company, if you're a individual who's making relatively higher income than majority or the average person, you have to pay higher taxation. What had happened previously is you would find leverage, you would find loopholes in the system. Tax evasion is very prevalent in the Sri
So are you
Lankan
saying
tax system.
expansion of the tax base is coming in the next year?
Yes. So one of the key areas, this act, the main focus of the act is to make sure that everybody is in the tax net, and compliance rises as we continue. And I think we have seen it also in the past year, not just indirect taxation. There is increasing direct taxation also. So compliance is gradually improving, and we hope to see more improvement with the new laws as well.
So when the government revenue increases or whatever in that period of time, could the existing people who are in the system expect a sense of ease, any benefits to them or anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. I think what we also need to understand about taxation is taxes are eventually spent on people as well, right? So when we say that we are bringing in new transport, let's say metro bus, or when we say we are bringing in new railways, and the government is spending this money without relying on foreign loans, that it's directly budgeted out of Sri Lanka at the treasury. So that means that the government is spending tax money, and it eventually translates into better public services. It eventually translates into easy access to public services. So that's something that we have to get on board with. So maybe yes, we are paying a little bit higher than what we used to, but eventually it will also mean we have better public services. This Professor Mick Moore, who I think I'm sure maybe but he's an expert on taxation. And one of his articles or theories I've read, I can't remember which one, but he articulates that one of the key changes that happened since 1977 is that because government expenditure fell, because there was this sense that government doesn't have to deliver public services, the pressure on taxation also fell, right? So by the time in 1977, there was about 22% of GDP in terms of government revenue. Yeah. But eventually it will fall down to 14%. Yeah. In 1994, I think it was somewhere close to 15%. Yeah. And then by the time we were bankrupt, it was roughly 8%, yeah. Right? So the idea that the government collect taxes also has to be tied up to the idea that the government is actually going to spend it on you. But when you don't have a sense of that, then you try to avoid taxation. I think one of the key challenges that we have as the government is to build that level of trust, yeah. within the taxpayer.
As you rightfully said, yeah. I mean, collection of tax, and I mean, Sri Lankan tax system basically is indirect tax.
Yes.
Any initiatives to improve the government revenue diversification, to diversify government revenue?
Diversify in the sense we are trying to look at property taxation.
Okay.
But there was a decision made in the cabinet also about property taxation, but not the imputed rental income tax that was discussed earlier. I'm not sure. I mean, you have to officially get this information from the finance ministry, but I think there is a discussion about property taxation and about introducing, taxes into let's say the digital services tax, for example, which is also again an indirect tax, unfortunately. But I think we are relying on indirect taxation because it's easier collection as opposed to direct taxation.
Yes, definitely.
But we do understand that it puts a lot of burden on the consumer's end, and that is something that needs to be fixed.
And you guys are looking at it.
Yeah, we're looking at it because once I think when the economy expands, especially because we're looking at the digital economy. When the economy is expanding, of course, which should also mean that the tax base of that expanded economy should also increase, right? So definitely. We're looking at that as well.
We are in an IMF program.
Yeah.
In 2028, the program will end. And the next 10 years, till 2038, will be a very tough period for Sri Lanka. In your perspective, what is there for Sri Lanka after IMF? How would Sri Lanka take this on?
Yeah, I think we are very worried about IMF because we are not used to governing our economy well, right? So we are always looking at somebody from the outside to sort of, babysit us.
Yes, definitely.
And tell us, this is right, this is wrong. And we are looking at external conditions to put us in the right track.
Definitely.
I think we feel very secure when somebody is, constraining us. But the bad thing about that is somebody is actually constraining us, right? Definitely. So it's not just the bad decisions that we can't make. Whatever the good decisions that we also want to make, we can't make it because there are external forces acting on the economic decision making. I think our president has always referred to our economy as a sort of there's no economic sovereignty in the country. That's what he keeps saying because just because IMF is there are a lot of criticisms about the way IMF acts in other countries as well. I'm not saying that they have done exactly the same to Sri Lanka, but we also should develop that autonomous, sovereign decision-making capacity in the area of economy as well. Just because we have managed it badly in the previous, under previous governments, doesn't mean we have to continue that line.
Definitely.
And I think the last 1.5 years, this is why I particularly refer to the public finances, because we have managed to bring the revenue up, put the expenditure down beyond the IMF targets.
If I be a little bit more blunt, without that accountability, without that babysitting, can Sri Lanka stay on the path?
Yeah, with the right kind of governance, you can. With the right kind of governance, that because whenever we say that the treasury has a buffer, that we have savings in the treasury, we have almost about, I think, close to 1 billion even right now, 1 trillion even right now at the treasury, because the government is very careful about what we want to spend it, right?
Yeah.
But you would see constantly there is demands, if you have money, why are you not spending on this? Why are you not giving this one subsidy?
What would be the government's approach after 2028 is what I'm actually trying to get at.
The same approach. Same approach. Just because the IMF is out doesn't mean we are going to be, very...
Focus areas, maybe for development or whatever?
Same areas, right? So our development areas in the IMF is mainly invested in debt sustainability and public finances. Because they want to make sure that we are right on track to make the debt payments. And we have money in our treasury to do that, right? So I think we are good in that area right now. In terms of economic development, IMF doesn't really have a concrete plan on that. That is something that we have to develop. which is why we think export industries, bringing in more FDIs into energy, transport, and digital economy, which is the areas that we have lined up, right? Energy, transport, and digital, where we will, this is not an IMF plan, this is the government's plan. And we also think that it's also, I mean, because I'm a woman, and we are, because I'm a woman parliamentarian, we also need to make sure that women are more connected to the economy. It's a huge gap in our economy that we don't have women participating in, productive economy.
Definitely.
And they are, they're sort of constrained into domestic work and domestic economy, that they are not, getting into the salaried waged economy. That's something that we have to fix.
Lastly, I think what I'm getting the sense of is that the government will still try to focus on the priority areas and the 3 areas that you mentioned earlier in the interview.
This was a really good interview, by the way. Thank you for having me here. And I think it is a tough time. It's a very tough time. And we do understand that most of our population is under a lot of stress, economic stress specifically, right? Because of the fuel prices, because we have to face a situation that we cannot fully control. Of course, as the government, every day we are also, expecting good news to make sure that, world trade is normal again. But it's a tough situation. We can't entirely control what is happening in the rest of the world. But as the government, as the NPP government, what we have tried to do is make sure that people don't feel the full brunt of the crisis, the global energy crisis. That is not just an energy crisis, actually, it's a huge economic crisis. So what is unraveling in outside of our borders, which is why we have focused on subsidies. But of course, going forward, it's going to get tough, because we have also constrained, we have limited finances in the treasury as well, right? But we are focusing on making sure that people have a regular, normal economic activity. It's important, not just because we don't want to make sure that people are not burdened, but also because we feel like growth is important. Stunting growth at this point is not going to contribute well to Sri Lanka's economy, right? We can easily go back and roll back all these growth policies and go back to austerity policies, which we were sticking for, I don't know, maybe for like 5-6 years. But that will actually stunt growth. Like you can see, even with the crisis, we have 5.1% growth in the first half of this year, which means the focus on growth is actually working, right? It's not easy, because you have to make sure that focus on growth doesn't spill over into an economic crisis, which is what everybody is trying to anticipate, right? But I do feel like there is a fine balance that we can walk, a very precautionary road that we can take, where we balance growth with the challenges that we face. And our treasury, especially the treasury, because of good public finance management that we've had for the last 1.5 years, we are in a position to sort of cushion the blow on the people and making sure that growth continues, which is also why we are looking at more public investment next year. So it's supposed to come up to 2 trillion, which is like a first time in Sri Lanka. So let's see. I mean, it's a challenging time, but I think more concern from the government and very flexible policy making from the government, not sticking to ideological policy making, is very important to navigate this road.
I think sustained continuous growth is also what our people is also after. Thank you for accepting our invite and being here today. Hope you have a good day.
Thank you so much.